William K. Stewart and F. E. Patzak. The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, based on the characters created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Episode 8. Sherlock Holmes and the Sultan's Gift. Narrated by David McCran. I appear to be a fond target of fate's whims. A short time after the day I could not convince Holmes to take me to the zoo, and instead followed him to northwestern Wales, we ended up at the London Zoo after all. George Collingwood, the third son of Baron Collingwood, whose family we saved from a supposed curse that made them victims of vampire attacks, called us to his workplace regarding a complex criminal case. His domain, to be precise, was the zoo's reptile house, but the director, who knew of Collingwood's acquaintance with Holmes, charged him with the matter, even if it was outside the herpetologist's purview. We arrived at the northern end of Regent's Park, on the border of Westminster and Camden, where we spotted Collingwood waiting for us at the zoo's main entrance. After greeting us and thanking us for coming, he got straight to the point. "Gentlemen," he explained, "this is serious. There was a death at the zoo, an unmistakable case of murder. It appears the victim was stabbed in the back." "Wouldn't it have been wiser to call the police?" I queried, somewhat perplexed. Collingwood hesitated briefly. "Well, that's precisely what we did. But there is some confusion about who's responsible for this case." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "How so?" he asked. Collingwood gathered himself. "The two gentlemen from Scotland Yard who were here concluded that they could not investigate this as a murder. Instead, they classified the crime as property damage. The director and I disagree. If you would follow me, I will show you to the victim and the crime scene. I believe this will help clarify what we are dealing with." He led the way. Holmes and I passed each other puzzled looks. The mystery intrigued Holmes, which is why he rushed after Collingwood to catch up with him by the giraffe enclosure. To consider a murder property damage, I mused to myself, seems rather disrespectful and inappropriate and unprofessional for an officer of Her Majesty the Queen. "Quite right, Dr. Watson," Collingwood replied, "but it's a trifle more complicated than it appears. You must look for yourself." We continued past the South American llamas, a weary brown bear, and hyperactive African lemurs, eventually arriving at a cordoned-off area of the zoo, presumably owed to the fatality. Collingwood stopped in front of the enclosure of an oversized Australian kangaroo. "Here it is," he said, "to the left of the great grey kangaroo." Holmes and I approached the iron bars of the neighbouring cage. On the floor lay a lifeless body face down with a knife sticking out of its back. The corpse was undressed, but covered from head to toe in orange hair. The poor murder victim was an orangutan. I was still wondering whether this was some sort of a sick joke when Collingwood began his long-overdue explanation. "This is Musa, our Borneo orangutan, Pongo pygmaeus." "It's an ape," I remarked dryly. Holmes nodded in my direction. "Very good, my dear Watson. I see you're making good progress in your study of zoology." Collingwood, remaining focused, continued. "Musa had only been with us for 3 weeks. He came to England on the HMS Ulysses, accompanied by a Malayan caretaker who helped with the transition. The caretaker just returned to Borneo 2 days ago, and now Musa is dead, maliciously murdered thousands of miles from his home." "It's an ape," I repeated, glaring at Holmes with piercing eyes. But Holmes was not receptive to my insinuations. "Musa," he murmured, "is the Muslim Arabic name for Moses. Undoubtedly, someone here disobeyed the fifth commandment." "It is an ape," I repeated for the third time, this time extra slowly. "And that is likely why Scotland Yard refused to conduct a murder investigation. God's commandments and British law apply only to human beings." Holmes thought about it briefly, but had already made up his mind. "We'll make an exception on this one," he determined, "for I'm convinced the perpetrator is indeed a Homo sapien." Collingwood breathed an audible sigh of relief, drowning out my sigh of exasperation. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Thank you for taking on the case. You must know that this is a sensitive matter. Moose's death could cause a geopolitical crisis, or at least a serious diplomatic upset." I could not hold back from laughing. "Don't tell me this ape had diplomatic status," I quipped, but Collingwood remained stoic. "Musa was an ambassador of goodwill and international friendship," he explained. "He was a gift from the Sultan of Brunei to Queen Victoria, who placed him in the care of the Royal Zoological Society." "One does not gift living things," I scolded with a raised finger. "It's a common diplomatic practice," Collingwood countered. "The path to the left of the orangutan enclosure leads to a succession of international gifts. Snow leopards from the Russian Tsar, pot-bellied pigs from the King of Siam, penguins from the Danish king, a hairy rhinoceros from the Maharaja of Dangapur, and marmots from the King of Bavaria." I was out of a witty reply, and plainly stated, "Impressive." Holmes glanced at the marmot enclosure. Apparently, these animals were not expected to adhere to a vigorous work schedule. He then turned his attention to the enclosure next to the scene of the crime, wherein a kangaroo from Queensland, gifted by Her Majesty herself, was busy eating. "Very interesting," Holmes finally said with a hint of sarcasm. "So, the orangutan was a gift from the Sultan of Brunei. What exactly did the Sultan hope to get from the British Crown in return for this donation?" "Undoubtedly improved bilateral relations," Collingwood answered. Since Holmes had very little interest in foreign affairs, I felt compelled to explicate. "You must know, Holmes," I began, "that Borneo, which by the way is the world's third largest island, is split into two parts. The southern part belongs to the Dutch East Indies. The northern part is ruled by the Brooke family, originally from Devonshire. Their rule is sanctioned by the Sultan and naturally backed by the Empire. This northern part surrounds the enclave of Brunei, the actual dominion of the Sultan, which so far has managed to keep the colonial powers at bay. Its present ruler, Abdul Momin, is determined to maintain the dominion's independent status, which is why he is keen to preserve good relations with the European powers in the region, Great Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, and Germany." "I see," said Holmes, "and Musa's violent demise may damage the relations between Great Britain and Brunei." "Are you suspecting a politically motivated assassination?" Collingwood inquired. Holmes nodded. "Quite right," he confirmed. "There are a few other reasons to murder an ape at the London Zoo." I must admit, I could not think of another reason any other than complete madness. "All right, Holmes," I said, clearly defeated. "We shall fulfill our patriotic duty to the Queen and the homeland and uncover this deceitful sabotage of British foreign relations." Holmes shook his head. "Nonsense, my dear Watson. Whatever the conspiracy is, It will come to light once the intelligence service begins its investigation. The motivations aren't pertinent to the murder itself and to our job of identifying the perpetrator. Crimes can be solved by abductive reasoning. My distrust was stirred. "What do you suggest?" I inquired. "Elementary," Holmes replied. "While Mr. Collingwood is gathering the orangutan caretakers for questioning, we, which means you, will perform the autopsy." This was the fourth time I felt compelled to assert, "It's an ape." Holmes smiled contentedly. "Marvellous, Watson. We can build on that fact." "I am a doctor of human medicine," I protested. "My dear Watson," Holmes responded calmly, "don't hide your light under a bushel. There's no need for an expert in veterinary medicine. These primates are our closest relatives, provided Darwin is correct, as I believe him to be. Save for a few details, their anatomy and physiognomy are essentially the same as ours. We are all hominoids, after all." I breathed deeply and faced the unavoidable. "Very well, Holmes," I said. "You wouldn't back down anyhow." Collingwood showed us to the victim's cage. It was connected to the kangaroo enclosure to the right and to the cages of the other endowed animals to the left. The enclosure's back wall abutted the administrative wing from which caretakers could access each cage through a separate door. Some cages, including those of the orangutan and kangaroo, had cross-connections in the form of gates that could be opened to enlarge the space if necessary. After Collingwood had shown us everything, he left to fetch the orangutan's caretakers as we had requested. Minutes later, I was kneeling over the primate's lifeless body, my open doctor's bag next to me. I was thinking about where to begin as Holmes was peering over my shoulder impatiently. "Now, Watson, what do you see?" I answered without looking up. "The victim was stabbed." I grabbed the knife by the handle and pulled it out. "With a hunting knife," I added, "and quite a long one at that. It must have pierced the heart when it entered the animal's top left back. Cardiac arrest, suspended circulation. The victim died whilst falling unconscious from severe bleeding. A highly professional murder, if you ask me. No carnage, no fight to the death. It was done very quickly." Holmes nodded. "That's exactly what I thought," he said contentedly. "Right," I answered somewhat indignantly. "Why dig around the bloody ape's body when you already know everything anyhow?" With these words I handed Holmes the knife, which I wrapped inside a handkerchief. "A Bowie knife," Holmes spotted at first glance. "Excellent quality, a stainless steel blade, manufactured in the Rhenish-Prussian city of Solingen by Blaubart and Sons." Holmes had impressed me once again. "That's phenomenal, Holmes," I cried. "How can you tell?" Holmes cleaned the ape blood from the knife with the handkerchief and held it under my nose. "It is engraved into the blade. Can you see it?" Now I could also see the small engraving. Blaubart and Sons, Solingen. "Back to the victim," Holmes ordered, changing the subject. "What can you tell me about Moses?" I took a deep breath and exhaled audibly. I then proceeded to turn the body over with great effort. Holmes, of course, showed no interest in helping me. The orangutan wore a peaceful and serene expression, as if he was sleeping. He almost reminded me of a human toddler. "I estimate the victim's weight to be around 80 pounds, I explained. "At 4 feet tall, he is fully grown. As you know, I'm neither a zoologist nor primatologist, but I'd say he was at least 10 years old. Moses is furthermore. But how can it be?" I paused and looked up at Holmes, perplexed. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Moses," I stuttered, "is female." "How interesting!" Holmes exclaimed. "Are you sure you're not mistaken, Watson? Like you said, you are not a veterinarian." I jumped to my feet. "My dear Holmes," I explained, "no matter how much red-brown fur covers the animal's pubic area, I can recognize female reproductive organs when I see them, be it on an ape or on a human being. And I also know when there are no male genitals where they're supposed to be." "All right, Watson," said Holmes. "Let's keep this peculiar discovery to ourselves for now." Collingwood returned with the two zookeepers responsible for the orangutan. They were two young men in their 20s who were hired for their experience with primates. "We hired them when Musa arrived in London," Collingwood explained. "We sought two zookeepers with practical experience. For the past 3 weeks they have been trained by their Malayan colleague while familiarizing themselves with the orangutan." "I see," said Holmes. "We will question them together." He then turned to the first zookeeper, Mr. Goodall. "We would like to begin with you." Goodall was an unusually tall man with straw-blonde hair. His work overall was heavily stained, presumably from regular cleaning of the animal enclosures. "If I was informed correctly," Holmes continued, "it was you, Mr. Goodall, who found the dead orangutan this morning." "That's right," he confirmed. "I was in the changing room in the employee wing when I suddenly heard Musa scream loudly, which was very unusual. I immediately rushed to the cage through the back door, but I arrived too late. The animal was already dead." "Did you see anyone?" Holmes pressed on. Goodall shook his head. "I don't think so," he answered. "There was no one in the changing room and the enclosure. Visitors had not been admitted yet. After about 2 minutes I was joined by my colleague Mr. Fossey." Fossey was the second primate caretaker, an extraordinarily muscular man, but significantly shorter than Goodall. His work clothes were clean. His left eye showed the beginnings of a bruise. By tomorrow it will have become a black eye. "Mr. Fossey," Holmes asked, "where were you at the time of the crime?" "I had just arrived," he explained. "I could hear the scream coming from the orangutan enclosure from quite a distance. I ran through the employee wing to the cage where I found Mr. Goodall with the dead primate." "I presume you didn't see anyone on your way?" Holmes speculated. Fossey confirmed with a nod. "Mr. Fossey," I interjected, "may I ask how you got your black eye?" "Naturally," he answered, smiling. "I got involved in a little argument at a pub last night. An Irish separatist insulted the Queen. As a staunch unionist, I could not accept that. You should see the other guy." Holmes chimed in. "Patriotic duties aside," he said, "let's get back to the case at hand. What can you tell us about the victim?" "There isn't much to say," Fossey began. "Musa was a good-natured, trusting orangutan. He must have lived in captivity for a long time, as comfortable as around humans as he was." "I see," Holmes said as he began to pace. "Mr. Collingwood told us that you are an expert in primate care. Where were you employed before?" "In Vienna," Fossey answered. "I was responsible for the mountain gorillas at the Schönbrunn Imperial Zoo." "That's correct," Collingwood confirmed. Holmes approached Goodall. "And you? What is your experience with primates?" "For the past 5 years I've been taking care of chimpanzees at the Royal Menagerie in Brussels," Goodall explained. "I have properly presented my papers." Collingwood also confirmed this fact. Holmes paced up and down the enclosure like a tiger. He circled the deceased orangutan twice, then suddenly stopped and announced, "Gentlemen, thank you for your cooperation. I have solved the case." Collingwood looked stunned. Solved? Already? How is that possible? Who is the perpetrator? Slow down, said Holmes, one step after the next. Before we get into that, I regret to inform you, Mr. Collingwood, that both of your caretakers are fraudsters. That's outrageous, Goodall cried indignantly. Calm down, please, Holmes begged. You will have ample opportunity to explain yourself. The same goes for Mr. Fossey, if that's even your real name. Of course it is, the second zookeeper protested. I refuse to be defamed as a liar by some would-be detective who, for all I know, is a perfect stranger. Holmes remained calm. Do not worry, he said. We will carefully investigate the identities of Messrs. Fossey and Goodall. Forgive me, but I doubt that these people are who they claim to be. But that's not the point. What is the point? Collingwood asked. He was now utterly confused. Mr. Holmes, what kind of show is this? A rather shallow comedy, but with a tragic end for the orangutan. And your supposed colleagues don't exactly shine in their roles as primate keepers. In fact, the two gentlemen are neither trained in the dramatic arts nor in professional zookeeping. To be exact, they even lack basic zoological foundations. Dr. Watson, would you please continue? Of course, I affirmed and bent over the dead primate. Gentlemen, if I may direct your attention to the victim's genital area, you will notice something missing. In other words, the ape is female. Holmes took over again. Thank you, Dr. Watson. The question at hand is, what kind of primatologists don't identify their protégé's correct gender for 3 whole weeks? Well, Fossey stammered, I didn't question what I was told. It was a careless error that exposed your cover, Holmes declared. And it wasn't even your only negligence. Your employment references are all forged. There are no, and never were any mountain gorillas at the Vienna Zoo, meaning you couldn't have been their caretaker. Mr. Fossey, Collingwood exclaimed, is that true? Mr. Goodall's manipulated curriculum vitae is just as sloppy, Holmes continued. The Brussels Zoological Garden went bankrupt in 1877 and has been closed ever since. The chimpanzees have been transferred to the Royal Zoological Society of Antwerp. Mr. Goodall, Collingwood sighed. You too? I'm sorry to say, Mr. Collingwood, said Holmes, but your colleagues have never worked in a zoo before and have little or no practical theoretical knowledge of primates. The two men are secret agents that were planted at the London Zoo using false identities. The irony is that the two did not know about one another since they work for different employers, so each of them believed the other to be a real zookeeper. And who may these employers be? Collingwood inquired. That brings us back to the subject of geopolitics and diplomacy, and the implications thereof in the primate's murder, Holmes explained. It will be the job of our government authorities to deal with these, but I would like to attempt to draw a self-evident conclusion. Mr. Goodall, outfitted with deceptive Belgian credentials, appears to be a spy with the Dutch General Intelligence and Security Service. Mr. Fossey, who came equipped with a phony background provided by the Allied Austrian authorities, appears to work for the German secret police, and both had a license to kill. Collingwood's face, which had briefly lit up, went dark again. But Mr. Holmes, he concluded, we still don't know who killed our orangutan so savagely. That is correct, Holmes confirmed. They were sent from Berlin and Amsterdam with orders to fulfill their missions after the departure of the Malayan caretaker, and one was faster than the other. But who was it? Both had the opportunity, but only one committed the act. "For goodness sake, Holmes," I cried, "just tell us who it was." Holmes flashed his impish smile and proceeded to solve the murder. "Gentlemen, the following occurred. The perpetrator arrived at work extra early today to carry out the assassination without any witnesses. He hid the murder weapon, a long hunting knife from the contracting country, around his lower leg. Unobserved, he sneaked along the employee wing to the primate enclosure, where he found the good-natured animal unaware of its impending fate. The murderer then rammed his knife into the primate as soon as it turned its back to its supposed caretaker, causing the orangutan to collapse to the ground. What the perpetrator did not know was that his fellow impostor had also come to work earlier than usual to complete his mission. And it was he who heard the death cry. The perpetrator heard his colleague's footsteps approach and managed to get out of the enclosure before the door clicked open by exiting through the connecting gate to the neighboring kangaroo cage, and from there back to the employee wing. In doing so, however, he clashed with the giant grey kangaroo, which famously are excellent boxers. It threw a mighty punch to the culprit's left eye. Isn't that so, Mr. Fossey? Fossey instinctively reached for the bruise on his eye before quickly regaining his composure. "As I told you," Fossey explained, "I got the bruise from a brawl down at the pub. Your story, Mr. Holmes, may be interesting and thrilling, but none of it is true. None of it is provable." "You're wrong about that," Holmes refuted. "If you would remain patient, I will explain." "Do as you wish," Fossey growled, "but keep it short." "Thank you," Holmes replied. "Now, the perpetrator, Mr. Fossey, escaped through the kangaroo enclosure and back to the employee wing just as Mr. Goodall was entering the primate cage through the back door and discovered the dead orangutan. That must have been a strange sight, since Mr. Goodall was intent on committing the murder himself. Mr. Fossey, meanwhile, noticed that his clothes were stained with primate blood. He therefore rushed to the changing room to put on new, clean work clothes before returning to the back door and re-entering the cage, where he found Mr. Goodall with the dead orangutan. This is when Fossey played the part of stunned and horrified caretaker, a role they both continue to play. But now, gentlemen, enough is enough. You've both been caught. Fossey was not ready to give in and asked, "Where's your proof?" "None of this is substantiated." "My proof," Holmes explained, smiling, "is in your changing-room locker. You have had nowhere to discard your bloody clothes. The victim's blood will prove your guilt. Gentlemen, you will be held responsible for your crimes. 2 counts of fraud, foreign espionage, and high treason, and 1 count of murder, although the police will only consider it property damage. As foreign agents, you're destined for the dungeon anyhow." A half-hour later, we turned Goodall and Fossey over to Scotland Yard. British counterintelligence agents will certainly have some questions for the 2 gentlemen. Meanwhile, diplomatic back-channels between Netherlands and Germany will come up with explanations containing phrases such as unfortunate circumstances and misunderstandings. After enough hands have been washed in murky presumptions of innocence and some pawn sacrifices made, the intelligence services of the European powers from London to Istanbul, from Madrid to St. Petersburg, will go on with business as usual. On the geopolitical level, the Sultan of Brunei responded with trade sanctions against Germany and the Netherlands, and in doing so, leaned further into the grip of the British Empire, from which sooner or later there would be no escaping. The days of the independent sultanate were undoubtedly numbered. Even another orangutan sent to the London Zoo by the Sultan himself could not prevent it. 1 week after the murder, the funeral took place at the Hyde Park Pet Cemetery. Mr. Collingwood organised a beautiful ceremony. The gravestone displayed the name Moesha. Holmes and I sat in silence on the ride back to Baker Street. We were both lost in thought. I was first to break the silence. "What do you think, Holmes?" I asked. "What differentiates us humans from primates?" Holmes thought about it for a while, then said, "That's a difficult question to answer, my dear Watson, and different people will tell you different things. Ask a priest, and he will tell you the soul." "I do not wish to sin against the holy teachings of the Church," I argued, "but an orangutan's eyes do not seem empty and soulless to me." "Hinduism and Buddhism would agree, although they would call it karma. Perhaps that is the deciding factor," Holmes continued. "Consciousness. Does the primate know he has a soul? Does the primate know he exists? Perhaps that is solely a human capacity." I could not hold back a smile. "Do you mean to say," I asked, only in jest, "that a primate who knows he is a primate is human? Isn't there a trifle more to it? Culture, art, craft, philosophy, science? Or war, murder, suppression, and exploitation?" Holmes added. "Why don't we leave the primate in the terrestrial paradise? Not all must leave the Garden of Eden." "We left it," I countered, "to make the world subservient to us, including the animal kingdom." Holmes again needed time to reflect, then said, "I received a few pages of unpublished text from our mutual friend Dr. Engels. It bears the title, 'The Part Played by Labour in the Transition from Ape to Man.' In it, Engels views evolution as a dialect and materialistic process. As our animal ancestors are concerned, the interface between hands and mind caused the novel human condition to emerge from the animal kingdom." I turned up my nose. "Perhaps Mr. Engels should stay with economics," I answered briskly. "If you apply that rationale to our religious metaphors," Holmes mused sedulously, "then Adam and Eve would not have only been the first humans, but also the last of our ancestors that were apes." "Do me a favor, Holmes," I demanded after taking a deep breath. "Never utter these words in public, please." "But it is true," Holmes insisted. "In essence, we are merely slightly more developed apes. Admittedly, we've made a remarkable qualitative leap, but nevertheless, we descend from apes." "You perhaps," I answered, and resumed avoiding any further conversation with Holmes.